All right, so here's your homework from the lesson on finding trig values of any angle. But we're not going to do the unit circle work for this homework. So we're going to go up to question number, 12. All right, number 1. You're given a point. So if I would graph that point, negative 5, 12, what quadrant would that end up in? So negative and positive, it would end up in quadrant number 2. And in quadrant number, notice the reference angle there too, right, that we're using rather than the full angle. So negative 5, 12. So this is negative 5. This is 12. We need to find the radius, which is the square root of negative 5 squared plus 12 squared. So it's 144.25. The square root of 169, it's 13. So, and it's a Pythagorean triplet. Use the values that you see. So the x-coordinate is negative 5, the y-coordinate is 12, and the radius is 13. And then understand the different definitions of sine now. So it's not opposite, it's now the y-coordinate over the radius. And cosine's the x-coordinate over the radius. And tangent is y over x. And then the reciprocals. So 13 over 12, negative 13 over 5, and then negative 5 over 12. Again, so you're given a point. So understand what quadrant we're in. So negative, negative means we're in quadrant number 3. So draw a right triangle in quadrant number 3. And then label it. So the x is negative 4, the y is negative 10. Find the radius. So it's negative 4 squared plus negative 10 squared. So that's the square root of 116. 116 is 4 times, what, 29. So the square root of 4 is 2, so it's 2 root 29. That's going to help us. All right, so sine, so let's just summarize it. X is negative 4, y is negative 10. And r is 2 root 29. So those are the numbers we're going to use for our ratio. So sine is y over 2 root 29. Notice that 2 goes into 10 5 times. So when I multiply it, it'll be 5 root 29 over 29 when I multiply top and bottom. Cosine's x, so it's negative 4 over 2 root 29. Notice again the 2's divide, or the 4 and the 2 divide, so it would be negative 2. And then root 29 over 29. Tangent would be much simpler. It's just y over x. So it's negative 10 over negative 4. You can definitely write that as 5 over 2. And then the reciprocals. So cosecant, the reciprocal would be, remember it's a 5. So when you do the reciprocal, it's negative root 29 over 5. Secant, make sure it's 2. So it's root 29 over 2. When you do the reciprocal, and then cotangent's positive 2 over 5. Number 3. Use the information given to find the 5 that are missing. So I need to know what quadrant it's in. So tangent's negative. I'm not going to start with tangent or cotangent. Sine is negative. Sine is the y-coordinate. So if tangent's negative, then the x-coordinate must be positive. So when you divide it, the answer is negative. Remember, tangent's y over x. So when I go the y-coordinate divided by the x, the answer has to be negative. What quadrant are we in? So positive, negative, we're in quadrant number 4. So we're going to draw it in quadrant number 4. We're going to label it. So that negative could belong top or bottom. So in this case, it's going to belong to the 21. So y over x, the y-coordinate is negative and the x-coordinate is positive. I need to find the radius, which is the square root of 20 squared plus negative 21 squared. That's a Pythagorean triplet. Ends up being the square root of 841. That's 29 times 29. And then we use that triangle and the signs that we have to get the answer. So sine is y over x. So that's negative 20, or y over r. So it's negative 21 over 29. Cosine's x over r. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so it's negative 29 over 21. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. Cotangent's the reciprocal of tangent. And it's done. All right, again, number 4. And again, you can press pause at any time and try it first. That's the best. Then see if you're doing it right. So secant's negative root 10. Cotangent's greater than 0. What quadrant are we in? So secant is negative. It's the reciprocal of cosine, so it's the x-coordinate. If cotangent's positive, then both secant and both the x and y must be negative, because the definition is x divided by y. So when you divide it, it has to be a positive answer. So secant by definition is the radius over the x-coordinate. So what quadrant we're in, of course, is quadrant number 3. So we're going to draw the triangle in quadrant number 3 properly, and then we're going to label it. So we know the radius. So we have negative root 10 over 1, but that could also be positive root 10 over negative 1. So the radius is always a positive answer. The x-coordinate is negative 1, and then I need to find the y-coordinate. So to find the y-coordinate, it's root 10 squared minus 1, negative 1 squared. That's 10, take away 1. That's the square root of 9, which is 3, and it's also negative because we're in quadrant number 3. So negative, negative. Then use your definition. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse, y over r, whichever one you want there. So it's negative 3 over root 10 multiplied by root 10, and it's negative 3 root 10 over 10. Cosine's negative 1 over root 10 multiplied by root 10, and you get negative root 10 over 10. Tangent's opposite over adjacent. That's negative 3 over negative 1, which is just 3. Cosecant's the reciprocal, so it's negative root 10 over 3. Cotangent is the reciprocal here of 3, which is positive a third. All right, turn the page. Again, we're going to go to number 12. Now, what I recommend here before we get started, if I want to find the exact values using reference angles, and we're going to use special right triangles, I should just draw them up here so I don't have to draw them every time. So one special right triangle is a 45, 45, 90. So 45, 45, 90. That's 1, and root 2. I should draw it so it doesn't go over the question next time. So here, let me draw this one better. This one's going to be a 30, 60, 90. That's going to be 1, and then 2, and then root 3. So we're going to use those two triangles to help us when we get there. Here, step number 1 is to find the reference angle. So we're going to subtract 360 to do that. So the reference angle is 30 degrees. I need to know what quadrant we're in. And for 330, we're in quadrant number 4. And in quadrant number 4, cosine is positive. So know it's the x-coordinate, and the x-coordinate is positive in quadrant number 4. So we're using 30 degrees, so it's positive cosine 30 to get our answer. So I'm going to go here to the 30, 60, 90. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so it's positive root 3 over 2. Cotangent, 225. So the reference angle, we're going to use 180 because it's closer than 360. And when we do that, the reference angle is 45 degrees. Now, in quadrant 225 is in quadrant number 3, and in quadrant number 3, cotangent is positive because it's a negative divided by a negative. So it's going to be a positive answer. 45 degrees cotangent, the definition. So we're going to do opposite over adjacent, and that's 1 over 1, or the answer is just 1. Number 7, negative 120. So the reference angle for negative 120 is we need to subtract 180 from it. It's always written as a positive answer, so when I subtract it, I get 60. The quadrant negative 120, if I go clockwise, it's in quadrant number 3. And in quadrant number 3, sine is negative. It goes with the y-coordinate. That's what we're thinking. So the y-coordinate is negative in quadrant number 3. And now I can do it. So I know the answer is negative. It's sine 60. Go back to your special right triangles. Here's 60. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So it's negative root 3 over 2. Number 8, 135. So subtract 180. So the reference angle is 45 degrees. Secant, or what quadrant are we in? So 135 is in quadrant number 2. Secant's the reciprocal of the x, and the x in quadrant 2 is negative. So the reciprocal is negative. So I know the answer is negative, and it's secant of 45 degrees. So the answer is negative. 45 is hypotenuse over adjacent, so it's root 2 over 1 or just root 2. So the answer is negative root 2. Number 9, cosecant, 7 pi over 6. So I'm going to convert it. So the pi's divide out, 6 into 180, 30, so 7 times 30, so it's 210. Then I'm going to go 210 subtract 180 to find the reference angle. So the reference angle is 30. 210 is in quadrant 3. Because cosecant's the reciprocal of y, and I know in quadrant 3 y is negative, that our answer is going to be negative. So our answer is negative. It is the cosecant of 30 degrees, or reference angle. Go to your 30, 60, 90. And so from 30, cosecant is hypotenuse, which is 2, over opposite. And the opposite of 30 is 1. So it's negative 2 over 1, or just negative 2. Number 10. No one said this is going to be easy. So negative 5 pi over 4 times 180 over pi. So we're going to convert it. So 4 goes into 180 45 times, and then negative 5 times 45. So that's negative 225. The reference angle, use negative 180 or 180. Just subtract them as positive numbers. So that's 45 degrees when you subtract the numbers, and you can just use them as positives. What quadrant are we in? So think about negative 225 past negative 180. We're in quadrant going clockwise. We're going quadrant number 2, right? In quadrant number 2, x is negative, y is positive. Tangent is y over x, right? So positive divided by negative. So in quadrant 2, the answer is negative. So it's negative tangent 45 degrees. So go to the 45 degree reference angle. It's opposite over adjacent. So it's negative 1 over 1, or just negative 1. 2 more. And now you're going to appreciate the unit circle when we get there. So negative 3 pi over 2. We're going to multiply by 180 over pi and simplify it down. So that's negative 270. Now, for negative 270, that is not in a quadrant. It's on an axis. So negative 270, if we graph it, would actually end up here at the top, that point. So I need to know what that point is. And that point we're going to use, and this is work with the unit circle, that point is 0 and 1. This is the power of the unit circle we're going to use soon. But I want you to think of that radius there to be 1 and 0. And the definition of cotangent is x divided by y. So the x coordinate divided by the y coordinate, and it gives you the answer 0. That one is really more for down here. We haven't talked about the unit circle yet, and so this question is really a precursor to the unit circle, where this will be easier, because you can't draw a right triangle if it's on the axes. So we need to do questions that you can draw and understand the special right triangle. So this is not a special right triangle at all. But this one is, what's the value of sine pi over 3? So times 180 over pi. The reference angle is 60. I don't need to subtract anything. 60 is acute, so it's just 60. And so when I look at 60, understand it's opposite over adjacent. So here's 60. What's opposite over hypotenuse? Did I say adjacent? Opposite over hypotenuse. So it's root 3 over 2, and you have your answer. So there's your homework questions to do with finding trig values. No calculator, tons of thinking, tons of work, and worth it. So I'm glad you work through that with me and keep practicing. All right, Mr. G Math, over now.